Welcome to the Spin Room. I'm Jordana Miller sitting in for Ami Kaufman. We have 4 spin doctors joining us today to tackle the headlines. Here in the studio, we have Eli Hazan, the Foreign Affairs Director for the Likud Party, Alon Pinkas, the former Consul General of Israel in New York City, Ziv Maor, the Editor-in-Chief from the Mida news site, and joining us from Washington, D.C. is Debra Shushan, the Director of Policy for Americans for Peace Now. Now we're going to start in Gaza and take a look at the latest reports which suggest a comprehensive ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas may be inked by the end of the month. Plus, Israel's controversial Jewish nation-state law is being scrutinized today in a special session of parliament called by the opposition. Will it make any difference at all? And pulling the purse strings shut, Israel's prime minister says the EU will stop funding an NGO that he claims delegitimizes Israel's right to exist and defames it around the world. Let's dive right in. Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh and his delegation are heading to Cairo today to continue indirect talks on a ceasefire with Israel. According to a Turkish report today, Hamas sources say they are optimistic a deal can be closed by the end of August. Now, it would reportedly be a 5-year deal implemented over several phases, beginning with the full opening of Egypt and Israel's land crossings for goods in exchange for a stop to all Hamas border protests, rockets, and kite bombs. But it is reportedly the later phases of the deal that are proving challenging. Now, that includes the thorny issue of Palestinian reconciliation, the scope of UN rehabilitation projects, and Hamas's return of the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers and 2 live soldiers. So let's turn now to our panel. Eli, I want to start with you because the Prime Minister has negotiated indirectly with Hamas over ceasefires in the past. But what makes this time different? Is there a different approach by the Prime Minister, something he's learned from the past?
First of all, we are very close to the edge, as we call it. This time it's going to be different because Israel cannot stand it anymore, this kind of situation. I believe this is the last chance. We have no other choice but to do it in this way. Besides that, we have a direction. We were trying to find a kind of a solution to the impossible situation in Gaza. And I believe this is the right direction, and we are going to start it, and let's see what would be the outcome.
Alon, are you optimistic that some kind of agreement can be inked and we can pull back from the brink of war?
It could happen. If it happens, it'll last 3 or 5 years. The only problem I have with that is while it needs to be done, it leaves Hamas with the decision or the dominance over when to escalate instead of Israel. It relieves us, per the agreement, of any offensive initiatives. That said, I don't see any other choice but to negotiate with Hamas about this. As unsympathetic as I am to any kind of negotiations with Hamas, this government and the previous government, for that matter, both negotiated with Hamas many times. And am I optimistic? No.
No, not about a long-term solution. No. One of the real obstacles, it seems, to a long-term solution is the political divisions within the Palestinian camp. And that is something that is still seems to vex these talks, because ultimately it seems that Hamas is unwilling to really give up its power. Ziv, how do you think this negotiation might be different, because it does include demands on Palestinian reconciliation?
Well, first, I don't understand what standing does Hamas has for any demands whatsoever. As for the political divisions that Gaza has within itself, I think that this is the thing that the Israeli government should be focused at, because this agreement, just like anything else that Hamas did in the past 4 years, is nothing but a political stunt. They have no standing to negotiations of an agreement that is supposed to be lasting for 5 years. They have not threatened us, the threat from the kite bombs and everything else. There is nothing new to us. These are threats that, well, we don't like that, but we can face it and we can deal with it. They are not forcing our arms. And the thing that they ask in returns for stopping this PR joke, which is the kite bombs, is basically very extensive and very comprehensive. Now, the most important thing, the biggest threat or the biggest change of mindset that is demanded on behalf of the Israeli government when approaching this issue is leaving the UN out of it. The UN has proven to be, with UNRWA, with the UHR, to be devoted to the Palestinian side of the conflict, to the terroristic approach of Hamas, and to the basic end. They want no Jews in Israel. This is what Hamas says. And the UN, instead of taking a neutral standing, support this bigot standing. The UN should not be a part of it whatsoever. Now, Egypt can go in and rehabilitate Gaza. The US should be able to do that. But the UN has proven to be unreliable, at least as far as it concerns Israeli interests.
Debra, I want to bring you into the conversation because certainly a lot of people will disagree that the UN is 100% on the side of Hamas. Certainly the special coordinator, Nikolai Mladinov, who's been so involved in these talks, would disagree. What do you say?
Well, of course, I would disagree with what we just heard from the last speaker. Let's just keep in mind here, if we think in a broader historical perspective, that Israel would not exist if it hadn't been for the United Nations and its passing of the partition plan back in 1947. Israel remains a full-fledged member, of course, of the United Nations. You know, it's just absurd to say that the UN shouldn't have any place because of a perception that the UN is one-sided. If we want to talk about players that are one-sided, obviously my own country, the government of the United States, under President Trump, has become incredibly one-sided, and as a result, has apparently really removed itself from the equation of negotiating this important ceasefire, at least largely. And I think we should be very grateful for the important role that Nikolai Mladinov has played in this process.
Alon, do you think the United States is not playing a big enough role in these talks?
It's not playing a role out of choice. The U.S. made a conscious decision not to be involved in the Middle East for understandable reasons. By the way, President Trump's policies are consistent with Obama's policies, which are gradual disengagement from the Middle East, at least from the Israeli-Palestinian issue. I don't think the U.S. can play any role. You know, if the President Trump would ask me, should I get involved in Gaza, I'd say, what the hell for, Mr. President? There's nothing in it for you.
But isn't the U.S. playing a role with offering to put up millions of dollars for the ultimate, you know, carrot, should we say, if Hamas plays along? They will help with the rehabilitation of Gaza. Isn't that a role?
You just answered that in your previous monologue by saying that domestic or internal Palestinian political divisions preempt, or undermine any kind of understanding. As long as the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, and Gaza are separated politically, it raises a major question mark over the ability or viability of the two-state model to those who adhere to that model. Certainly the Palestinians, certainly half of Israel, and certainly those in the U.S. who claim to have a plan which will propose such a state. The U.S. is not involved in Gaza because, by the way, Gaza could be dealt with between Israel and Egypt. It's Egypt that's not playing a big enough role, not the U.S. It's Israel that, for good reasons, has inhibitions about negotiating with Hamas and thereby granting them political legitimacy. It's a major issue. When I go back to what I told you before, that is why I'm not optimistic about this.
Eli, I want to ask you about the role of the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas, because he seems to have, at some points in the last couple of weeks, tried to undercut these talks because he sees it as the United States or the international community maybe will cut a deal with Hamas without including the PA.
He plays a very destructive role in the situation in Gaza, and of course he wants to preserve his power as the leader of the Palestinian Authority, as the leader of the Palestinians in general, and therefore he will do everything human possible in order to prevent an agreement between Israel and Hamas. For some reasons I can understand him. On the other hand, I believe he should be focused on his side and the actions that he is taking in order to be more negotiable with Israel, because right now it seems that he doesn't want to make any step towards Israel regarding when you speak about the negotiation or at least be more close to Israel.
Right, all right, we're going to leave that there. This is a topic that's not going away, so we're going to come back to it. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us here on the Spin Room. A lot more coming up.
In the Holy Land, there are wonders most people never get to see. i24 News will take you inside the shadows and unravel the secrets of some of the world's most revered sites in a way you've never experienced. All access from every angle. Tune in to Sacred Sites 360, Sunday 9 p.m. Eastern, only on i24 News.
I'm David Schuster.
And I'm Shayna Stulin.
Join us on i24 News for our show Crossroads.
We bring you a comprehensive
and engaging
look at the global news and opinions from the crossroads of America.
Weeknights beginning at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on i24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. Israel's parliament is holding a special session today on the controversial nation-state law. The opposition called for it after a storm of criticism by lawmakers, some who call it undemocratic and discriminatory. The law says that Jews have a unique right to national self-determination in Israel, but it fails to mention equality for minorities. It also elevates Hebrew to the national or official language and gives Arabic a, quote, special status. Now, the question today is what can be accomplished at this special session where just two lawmakers from Netanyahu's ruling coalition showed up. Still here with me in the studio is Eli Hazan, the Foreign Affairs Director for the Likud Party, Alon Pincus, the former Consul General of Israel in New York City, and Ziv Maor, the Editor-in-Chief for Meta News Site. And joining us from Washington, D.C. is Debra Shushan, the Director of Policy for Americans for Peace Now. Let's jump right in and start with, I want everyone to just take a listen to the opposition leader, Tzipi Livni. She was there today at the session. Take a listen to what she had to say.
I want to do something the Prime Minister won't do, and that's to apologise. Not only for the problematic and discriminatory law he passed this Parliament, but because he and the others in his government and his coalition didn't bother to show up for this discussion, to talk, to reply to questions, and to give the answers he owes, not only to you, the Druze community, but to all citizens of Israel.
Eli, I want to start with you. Why didn't the Prime Minister show up today if he's such a vocal supporter of this basic law? Why didn't he defend it for Israelis, for minorities, for even the international community, which is having a problem with this law?
Because there is no need. This is a kind of filibuster of the opposition about some. It doesn't need to come at all. It has been 80 discussions about the nation-state bill. Netanyahu declared more than one time about the need of this law. And Tzipi Livni, the chairman of the opposition, she wanted to get some attention from the public, but as you can see, she's irrelevant in many ways. She belongs to a minority that have no support from the people, and that's it. It looks like that, of course, she has the right as an opposition leader to create this discussion, but it's irrelevant. We continue to the next step.
Now, it's worth noting that Livni itself was a sponsor of this bill about 5 years ago with much harsher language against the very things that she wants to protect. Now, this testifies not only to the personality and political presence of Livni itself, but for the very grounds of the claims against this act. The left was for it for a very good reason. Israel is a national Jewish state from when it was established. The fact that the left in Israel currently is against this act is for only one reason, because it was eventually passed by a conservative coalition. This is the only reason. They're not against the text of it. Now, as for the claims that the bill fails to mention equality, well, there are other basic laws in Israel that to some extent mention equality. It's as if saying, if you take a look, for example, at the American Constitution, it has segments that deal with the president and it has segments that deal with the judicial branch. Now, mentioning the president in the judicial branch does not make sense. There are segments in the Israeli future constitution, which are the basic laws that deal with human rights. This is not the segment, that's all.
Debra, is it true that this kind of bill doesn't need to be discussed by the Prime Minister when many people, even in the international community, are saying that this undercuts Israeli democracy and they're concerned about it? Even sources at the White House, we are told, called the Prime Minister to discuss this specific basic law.
I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is making a real statement by not showing up at this special session about who he actually represents within the Israeli populace, that he represents the Israeli right wing, he represents those who voted for the Likud party and for his coalition, and that he doesn't feel a need to answer to the very legitimate and understandable and important concerns that the opposition is raising. And you're absolutely right that this bill has really, I think, led to a coalescing of opposition, not only among a substantial number of Israelis, both the 40% roughly of those who oppose the bill, the 60-some% of those who didn't feel it was necessary and who are concerned that it didn't mention equality at all. And I think really the Prime Minister has a lot to answer for, and it says a lot that he won't even show up.
Alon, there have been a number of petitions now brought to the Supreme Court asking to modify or overturn this law. Yesterday, we had one of the people who submitted that, one of the petitions from the Druze community, who said there's a problem here because a basic law that's passed after previous basic laws may set precedent. What do you think this law really needs to be changed?
Yes, but not via the Supreme Court. It has to be, if it needs to be amended, if it needs to be changed, if it needs to be nullified, it should be done in the political arena, not via the Supreme Court, for other reasons. It's a dumb law, it's a spite law, it's an in-your-face law, it's a law that should not have come to fruition. Yes, but yet it is a reality. Now face the reality in the political arena. Do not petition the Supreme Law. It's not going to get you anywhere. And by the way, there's nothing that Mr. Netanyahu would love more than for the Supreme Court to chop down the law.
So then he could attack
and then he could claim as part of his Trump-like, Orban-like, Duterte-like authoritarian mumbo-jumbo that it's all about the Supreme Court, that rules Israel, not the majority.
You know, it's so ironic. The two basic laws of 1992, they were promoted only by 32 MKs.
That was bad.
That was, at that time,
that
32.
Was very bad.
This basic law was promoted by 64 MKs. So that is the will of the people as far as I see it.
Listen,
we have a big majority.
I don't know if that's so significant, because when the civil rights movement was passed in the United States, it also wasn't by some huge majority. That's not the point.
No, it's significant because we needed to balance these two basic laws, which was crucial at that time. It was promoted by the Likud at that time. But we needed to balance it, and therefore the nation-state law, it's crucial, and we should think that it's there.
The people who appeal to the court asking to nullify this law basically are claiming to do so in the name of the 1992 act called the Basic Law of Human Rights or Human Dignity. Now, this law was passed in the middle of the night and was endorsed by 32 members of the Knesset. The National State Act was endorsed by 64 members of the Knesset. After 6 years of discussions and 8 discussions...
Does it matter how much, what the margin was?
The point is, in every
nation's history, there's a development in a continuum.
Not many in our audience know that Israel has got no formal constitution. Israel and the UK are the only two democracies in the world that has got no formal constitution. There is a claim to be...
written constitution. It is formal.
Yes, not a written. Okay, so basically the claim is that those basic laws that are passed within the Knesset, technically, just like any other law, unlike constitutions throughout the world that have a special process for amendments, etc. So these are presumed to be the constitution, and this is why this basic law was passed the way it was by 64 members of the Knesset. This is something that the people who passed 20 years ago, the acts upon which this act asked to be nullified, did not bother to do. They were enough with 34 members of the Knesset.
I want to give Debra actually the last word here. Go ahead, Debra. I just want you to respond to some of this.
Thank you so much, Jordana. So Yeah, I'm happy to do that. I mean, first of all, let's get our facts straight here. It was actually 62 MKs that voted for this bill. Okay. Yes, that is a majority. That is a majority out of 120. But one thing that we have to keep in mind is that in a democracy, you not only adhere to the will of the majority, you also, and the true value of a democracy is in protecting the rights of the minority.
Deborah,
and when you have such a substantial percentage of the population,
right back to you. We're going to take a quick break and pick up this discussion after a break. Stay with us here on the Spin Room.
Want my coffee, honey?
Roku Express. Now 500,000 movies and TV episodes? This is the ultimate streaming adventure.
Jack. Oh, great choice. Hey, where's my coffee?
Our world is becoming increasingly connected. 6.5 million Wi-Fi enabled devices are now shipping every day. Global consumer internet traffic is growing exponentially, with 2.8 billion internet users consuming video at a breathtaking rate. We are creating breakthrough technologies that connect millions of people and billions of devices, and securing our place as the most trusted business in technology. We are Eris, and we're powering your digital world.
Get i24 News anywhere, anytime. Download our app. i24 News. See beyond.
What you need to know, the news, fast and to the point, and the in-depth interviews that will keep you in your seat from the people that you trust. i24 News presents The New Rundown. Co-hosted by Nurit Ben and Kalev Ben David. Only on i24 News.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. We are in the middle, want to get back to a discussion about the controversial Jewish nation state law. Joining me here in the studio is Eli Hazan, the Foreign Affairs Director for the Likud Party, Alon Pinkas, the former Consul General of Israel in New York City, Ziv Maor, the Editor-in-Chief for Midah news site, and joining us from Washington, D.C. is Debra Shushan, the Director of Policy for Americans for Peace Now. And Debra, we had to cut you off there before going to a break. I wanted to let you finish what you were saying in response to our discussion about this law. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jordana. So the real value, in many ways, the real measure of a democracy is whether it protects the rights of minorities. And there is every reason to think that this bill does not do that. And we see much protest that's coming both within Israeli society as well as concerns that are being raised by true friends of Israel abroad. I am very concerned that Israel is shifting from its status as a liberal democracy to an electoral or majoritarian democracy. And yes, Israel will still be a democratic state, but one that tramples on the rights of minorities, and that I think is doing so in the context of a movement by the right-wingers in the coalition to annex the West Bank, at which point Israel will have to make a choice between being a Jewish state and being a democracy. And the coalition is clearly putting its cards on the table and indicating that in that choice, it will jettison democracy and go for being a Jewish state. And we should all, friends of Israel, be concerned about that.
I guess Debra is concerned since 1977. When you speak about the rights of minorities, I think you should learn a lot from Likud. For instance, I just read today that some of the city taxes of Zichron Yaakov will be delivered into Jisr HaZarka. This is not discrimination of minorities. Moreover, my government, headed by Benjamin Netanyahu, organized a sponsorship of 15 billion shekels in order to integrate the Arab society into the Arab society into the Israeli society. I can give you more examples.
We're going to leave that. We're going to come back to the discussion of how much the Israeli government allocates to integrating Israeli Arabs is really a topic for a whole new show. So we're going to let's move on and we'll come back to it.
In one sentence to what Debra said, while protecting the minorities is an important thing, it is not the essence of and not the measure of democracy. Democracy is only measured by one thing: to what extent does it connect between the public and the government? This is what democracy is all about, and it's not sacred whatsoever. Now, this act is the will of the people. That's that.
Okay, we're going to leave that there, Ziv. Okay, let's move on now to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he's convinced the European Union to stop funding an Israeli NGO umbrella group called the Freedom Protection Council. Now, Netanyahu accuses the left-wing NGO of trying to delegitimize and defame the Jewish state. The NGO's stated objective is to fight attempts to limit democratic freedoms. Now, the EU has not confirmed Netanyahu's claims, but according to its website, it was set to hand over nearly $500,000 to the NGO. I want to come back to our panel and begin with you, Alon. Netanyahu is claiming this as a victory, but some will say that he is just silencing critics of Israeli policies in the West Bank or in other places.
He's been doing that for a long time. On the other hand, I don't know enough about this ongoing affair because the European Union is slightly of a different opinion on where this stands. And apparently, again, with the limited knowledge I have, apparently this organization, this project is only partially funded until 2019. So from Netanyahu's point of view, as far as his policies go, you know, blaming the radical left and George Soros and Barack Obama, it is a victory. Whether or not it means anything remains to be seen. I don't know the exact details.
Ziv, this is a complicated situation because there have been some people who the EU has found were working for some terrorist groups, but this is a different case. These are Israeli groups such as B'Tselem, a Palestinian civil rights group, Adallah, that are part of this umbrella. So it's not quite the same thing.
Basically, this effort on behalf of Netanyahu and on behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs was initiated by an expose of Midah, it's worth mentioning. And the thing is that there is no silencing of critics. When an Israeli citizen, regardless of his political views, decides to take action and to be organized as an NGO, no one will try to silence it. But when a foreign country intervenes with Israel's internal affair by funding those organizations, instead of supporting voices, it basically distorts them. And putting pressure on the Israeli government on behalf of other governments is also legitimate, but by only one means, through embassies and through ambassadors. This is the way that countries interact. When a country funds a certain political segment of the population, this is an illegitimate way to conduct international relations.
Eli, Netanyahu's government has come under a lot of criticism for this. There was a big story this week. Simone Zimmerman, who used to work for Bernie Sanders, the presidential candidate back in 2016, she says that she was stopped and questioned at the border for 4 hours by the Shin Bet, who asked her about her political views. This is an American Jewish woman who is here working for an NGO. Why is that happening to her?
I don't know the details exactly. I know one thing.
It was a big story.
I don't know the details exactly, and I don't want to say things which would be not true, but I want to ask you one thing. What would you do if some people, including from the Democrats, will act against you, in not, I would say, in not legitimate ways? You would defend yourself, and this is what we are doing. I don't like all the system, but sometimes you need to do a few things in order to protect yourself.
Alon?
I said, I really have nothing to add. I mean, I agree with what they both said. I don't know enough details about what this specific incident is.
We're going to leave it there. Stay with us. We have a lot more coming up for you here on the Spin Room. We'll be right back after the break.